go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Career Insights on careers for architecture majors. My name is Ji Hyun Ju, and I'm an advisor and program coordinator here at Beyond Barnard. We'll be hearing from our 5 alums today. Thank you so much to our panelists for making the time to join us in your busy, busy days. There will be an audience Q&A at the end of our program. So for our students in the room, please feel free to ask questions in the chat or unmute yourselves when the time comes. So we'll get started with introductions. So a question for our panelists, what is your current role and what sparked your initial interest in architecture? And we want this to be, conversational, so please feel free to jump in whenever you're ready to speak.
So I'll go first then. So my name is Kate Regev. I'm a graduate of 2009, and I'm a licensed architect. I worked in architecture for a number of years, and earlier this year I translated mostly institutional and cultural clients called Zubatkin Owner Representation.
Kate, I think that the connection is a little bit off. Is that the case for everyone? You're frozen for me right now. While we wait for Kate to return to us, can we have one of our other panelists jump in with introductions?
Yeah, I can go. I'm Savon Gatsby, 2012 graduate. I don't work in the architecture field, but I'm a product designer at a startup, but I did study architecture, and I found that all the skills that you kind of pick up in architecture and learn in architecture kind of translate really well to product design, because it's just, it's architecture, but in 2D instead of in 3D. Yeah, I've been doing the product design since 2015 now, and before that I was at a PR firm that focused on architecture and interior design clients. So yeah, pass it on.
I can jump in. My name is Sabrina. I actually graduated Barnard in 2001 with a degree in English literature and writing. So I didn't actually really become interested in architecture until 2010. I started out of college. I actually moved to Korea and taught English, and then ended up getting a job at Doctors Without Borders. And so from there, in the New York office, I went to the field, and in 2010, I worked in Haiti after the earthquake. And so it was there that I really saw the impact that the built environment has on people's lives, and went back to school when I was 33 to get a master's degree in architecture. So since then, I actually worked again for Doctors Without Borders, doing some basically managing the build out and relocation of their New York office. And then now I work for a wayfinding design firm, and I do wayfinding and signage programming for transportation infrastructure projects, primarily in the New York area.
I guess I'll go. Hi, I'm Cole. I graduated in 2016, and I'm currently an architectural designer at a branding agency in the city. We specialize mostly in luxury residential projects and hospitality, just like a range of different things. And I originally got into architecture because I did fine art all through like elementary school through high school. And then I went to college. My mom suggested I try architecture to see if it was something more like applicable to my artistic talents. And I fell in love with it like my second semester of freshman year. And then I continued on with it. My grandpa was also an architect, so it's kind of like not just like completely out of nowhere. So, but yeah, so I just started this job at a branding agency back in June after I finished grad school in January.
Yeah, so my name is Manuela Iches, and I'm currently a business development specialist at Giant Architects. It's a firm that is based in Louisiana, but has an office in New York. We do a lot of cultural projects, performing arts. We are trying to expand their portfolio. But initially, my interest in architecture came from wanting to build a house for my grandma, who lives in Dominican Republic. Um, and a couple other things, but that was like my main thing. And then when I kind of stuck to it, just an interest in architecture, and then studying at Barnard was it just really created the foundation for deeper interest in it, because I learned that it's not just about building, it's more about thinking about the people, the clients, who you're building for, who's using the space. And a lot of that translate into what I do at Train Architects. I don't only do business development, I do some of the marketing stuff. So a lot of it's like catering our approach and understanding who is that we're speaking to, who's our audience, and how can we translate our work into something that's understandable by the general public, not just by those in the industry.
And Kate, do we have you back? Let me see. Please feel free to jump in with your introduction again. I'm so sorry we got interrupted there.
No, I don't know. I think the Wi-Fi is a little funky in my office today, but so I mean, I'll just say briefly again, because I don't know where I got cut off, but so I'm Kate Regev. I'm Barnard class of 2009. I majored in architecture. When I came to Barnard, I had no idea what I was going to do, but I knew I always loved history and historic buildings, and so I ended up studying architecture. I loved it. I loved the creative aspect, and along with kind of like the spatial three-dimensional way of thinking. So I went and got my master's degree in preservation and in architecture after moving abroad for a bunch of years after school. And then I've worked at a bunch of architecture firms. I'm a licensed architect. And then I recently moved to kind of the project management side of things, where I work on both kind of the design and the construction side of things, managing projects for a lot of cultural and institutional clients.
Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing. So we're seeing a lot of variety in the work that we're seeing across this panel. I'm curious if each of you can speak on how you utilize your undergraduate education in architecture beyond the classroom space. And anyone can jump in to get started.
I mean, I kind of touched on this in my introduction, but I found that because architecture at Barnard is not just architecture, you're getting the full liberal arts education, right? So a lot of the skills were so applicable, like presenting your work for design crits, thinking, like problem solving. A lot of what we did in our studios was problem solving. At the end, there was kind of a visual aspect to it, a creative aspect to it too, but your prompt was like, how do you move people through space? How do you create an environment that, you know, solves a certain issue that you're working on, or your client wants you to work on? We got to write a lot too. So one of the biggest things that you don't realize is, regardless of what your job is, you have to write, and you have to write well. So it was easy to kind of find, because of how well-rounded our education was at Barnard, it was very easy to find different ways to apply what we'd learned, or what I'd learned, into different industries. So when I started in PR and marketing, it was just like a lot of writing, and that was doable. It was writing about architecture, it was writing about design, which we'd also done, through some of our classes. There was logistics involved, so like organizing people and wrangling, which is kind of like what you have to do when you're working on a team project, or just even figuring out how to get your stuff done for finals. And there was also graphic design involved as well when we're creating all of our mock-ups for our crits, all of that stuff. Like you're learning how to present your work, how to design stuff that's not just architecture. It's like how to visually design and like show people information in a way that's like digestible. So a lot of that ended up being applicable. And when I ended up transitioning then to product design, it kind of all brought it together, because you have to like, when you're designing apps, you have to do copywriting, then you have to do still doing design crits. You have to like present this to your stakeholders and get buy-in for like why you made certain design decisions. Then you have to kind of think about the user experience, which is like similar to how, the built environment affects people. How does this app affect people, and how do you get them to take the actions that you want them to take or need them to take? So a lot of it just kind of translated pretty one-to-one. And I felt like even if it wasn't product design, it could have been something else, and it would have worked out.
Yeah, I'm just going to build off of what was just said, because for me, I think that when I was at Barnard, I felt like I wasn't the best person, like I wasn't the best designer in my studios, but I felt like I had a lot of things that I was able to do like well. And I felt like I was a generalist, and I felt like I really benefited in that way from the liberal arts education that Barnard provided me with. And I have just continued to use that. I mean, the writing in particular, and like knowing how to write a paper, write an email, like do research, that kind of thing has just been such a critical part of what I do. Especially, I mean, everyone is going to end up writing emails kind of no matter where you go. And there's nothing like writing a really clear email that will make it so that people will read it, understand what's going on, not have it be 25 pages long. And I just think that that's such a valuable skill no matter where you go. And so for me, that's been really important. And I think also just kind of the thing I love too about the program was the freedom to explore and to focus on things that were interesting to me or that were meaningful to me. And so I think that allowed me also to hone in while still remaining kind of like like a generalist, to focus in on certain things that that ended up becoming kind of what I wanted to do with my career, which was to focus on working with kind of existing and historic buildings.
Think also sometimes you have like Barnard allows, as we mentioned, for random interests. So you just take classes of different subjects, or even like the fact that the program crosses over with Columbia, you have the access to that resource. And a lot of those stuff that I didn't think, I took the class for fun, ends up being like something I used because, for example, I had taken, it was like an engineering course where we used like Maya, and then I ended up like talking to like the visualization folks, and I'm actually like having a conversation that explains and like this is what we need for this diagram, and they can like jump in and we can like work across, what they're doing, what I'm doing, and I can understand what the conversation is about rather than being just lost and just leaving it up to them. I think that's also another skill that not necessarily is out in front, but it's something that I definitely took from Barnard, that it not only helps you be independent, but also collaborative at the same time. So it's like I can work with other folks and what they're doing and present myself into the work rather than just like step back and just watch as people are going around and doing their own thing. And that helps me a lot because it's a lot of, it's a very male dominated field. So it helps with bringing up your own voice and engaging in the conversation. Don't be shy to like express yourself. And a lot of that is definitely a day-to-day for me where I've had to like make sure like my voice is heard, I'm expressing my thoughts, and it doesn't always get implemented, but in the end it does contribute to the end product. And I think that's like such a great thing about what it is at Barnard, where it's like not just like you're sitting down making a model. that's not always like what you end up doing. And maybe it is what you want to do, but you might do that in a different way, like exactly what you're doing now, like by building models, working with other people on a team, is a skill that you end up using not in the same way, but in a different form. And a lot of it is where you end up doing, like, it's a weird one-to-one in a way that doesn't look the same as you thought it would. I end up encountering that a lot. Like, I use stuff that I learned and I'm like, wow, I didn't think that was going to be used this way, but I end up using the skills like InDesign I used for presentations of my model, and now I'm using it for a presentation in like a proposal, which is like not exactly the same thing. It's like way more text and just images, but you're still using the skill in a different way. So everything gets really applicable to whatever you're doing. If you really think about like what you learned and try to apply for other things, that you can pick and choose where you use it.
I know I just spoke, but I just want to really quickly just speak to Manuela's point about learning to express your voice. And I think that is something that I know I learned at Barnard. I know that it was an environment for me where I felt like I could express myself and I wouldn't feel intimidated. I wouldn't feel like I was saying something wrong. And that is probably, I think, the most meaningful and valuable thing that I learned at Barnard, was that I have a voice and it deserves to be expressed. And as Manuela is saying, like, I regularly sit in rooms where I am the only woman, and to feel like I can speak and speak intelligently because, for example, I know how to do all these random things, like Manuela was saying, is just, it's so meaningful and really, really important.
I mean, continuing to build off of that, I think it was super obvious to me when I went to grad school, coming from Barnard, where there's like a lot of female faculty and a lot of female students, and going to grad school where I didn't have one female studio professor. I went into that space and like I had no problem saying what I was feeling, just because of the groundwork that I had at Barnard, even if like every single person that I spoke to was a man. And I think, especially coming from a liberal arts background, we like know how to speak in the abstract. And when you go to grad school and you come into contact with other students from like more technical schools, they're just like building boxes and they have no idea what they're talking about. And a lot of architecture is really just like the theory and concept about it. And I think especially in my first year, like with the other people trying to catch up, that was like a lot of what their learning curve was, just trying to express their projects and being able to like really talk through it and create projects that are just more than just the building. And that's something that was at Barnard was like a big part of it. Just every studio was like concept. And that really carries you through, especially if you're trying to go to more like higher level architecture firms. They really do focus on more like theory, because that's the stuff that kind of takes the design over the edge.
As I mentioned, I didn't actually study architecture as an undergrad, but I think I can just echo a lot of the things that people said about, the ability to communicate and the ability to speak up is something that surely, I started to learn at Barnard, and, working in a team is, pretty much all of the work that we do is team-based work. And especially in the transportation sector, it's very male dominated and also very engineering technical dominated. So people have a very specific knowledge base. And I think to have the education that you get at Barnard, where it's much more well-rounded, you really have an advantage in being able to draw on different parts of your background and bring it to the table.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing. I cut out really quickly and then hopped back in when my internet was working. It's this weather, it's rainy, and the technology is fickle. But I know that a few of you already touched on sort of skill sets that you've acquired under your during your undergraduate career. But looking back at your career thus far, what other skill sets would you say are important or essential to the current work that you're doing within the industry?
I will be honest, when I graduated Barnard, and even after I graduated from graduate school, both Barnard and I went to Columbia for grad school, both of them were, as Cole was saying, very like theory focused in a way and very conceptual. And so I felt like I really knew how to think about space, but I had so little technical understanding sometimes on certain things. And especially compared to people who had a more technical background, for me, that was something that I really needed to learn. Like, it was crazy because after, 8 years between Barnard and my graduate school, I felt like I didn't know what a wall was. Like, I had been drawing them and I had been modeling them. And I had been building models of them, but like when it came down to it, I was like, I don't know how thick something is. Like, how thick is a piece of sheetrock? Things like that I didn't know. And that really intimidated me. And it took me a while to feel like I was up to par with people who had a more technical background. But at the same time, everyone comes to something with their own knowledge and their own things that they don't know. And so, what I knew, other people might not have known. And I think that was true in graduate school and also kind of like coming out into the world, into kind of my career. And so that was something that I struggled with a little bit.
Yeah, I think that, like we've already sort of mentioned, I think communication is a big part of just like generally working in life. What Kay was just saying about feeling, I think, short on some technical aspects. Like in the ability to overcome that in a team is really critical in working with other people and being able to communicate, well, not just your own ideas, but also listening to what other people have to say. I can tell you, there's so many meetings where you just feel like people are not listening to each other. Everyone's giving their opinion and there's nobody that's really reflecting and trying to solve problems to move forward. I think that's a huge part of getting jobs done, just in general, in architecture and in other fields. And your ability to, really listen to others, to synthesize information and to try to find ways to move forward is extremely valuable. There's on transportation projects, there's usually up to 20 different disciplines working on a project. And in order to have everything, move forward smoothly, you've really got to be able to work with people who have different backgrounds, different knowledge bases, different ways of communicating. And I think that's sort of what people call a soft skill is really critical.
Yeah, I would also say sort of like two, not necessarily like skills you would think like, making a model or anything, but I would say like being honest and adaptable is pretty important. Like, and I mean honest in the sense of like, be honest in what you don't know. You shouldn't feel that you have the responsibility to know everything, just like what Kay was saying, like Barnard's education is very theoretical. And if you don't know the technical, like that's something to be honest about. And even if something like a different thing, or like if you're in a meeting and something's explaining something and you just walk away not asking any questions because you think like that makes you look bad, definitely ask questions because it's way more important that you figure it out. Like a lot of the folks you'll be working with are going to be folks that you're going to work day in and day out with, and they want you to be able to figure it out on your own. They want to be able to rely on you. And if you're not asking questions at the moment that you should, and you're then at the deadline, and it's like, actually, I don't know how to do that, then it's just gonna slow everyone down, and you don't want that to be something to worry about. And adaptability, in the same sense of like, you shouldn't be too stern or stiff in like a way of doing things, because there are so many things of like, I've gone through like meetings where I thought that the way I was doing it was fine, but then you get explained it, and it's like people have been in this industry for years. There's reasons certain things work, and you should definitely learn about that. And definitely, I know there's like not a generation, but like the how you say, you definitely want to propose new ideas, but don't go against any of the old ideas, I guess I would say, because you want to push the industry, be innovative, come up with new things, but also respect what has existed. So be adaptable to then incorporate the like what's the current method and the new method. You will find that a lot where I like, for example, I came to Tran, there was a couple things that they did in their workflow that I'm like didn't make sense to me, and you can definitely propose new ways of doing things, but also be aware that you might have to just mend yourself into their workflow while introducing things bit by bit, and that's really going to help you like in the long run at the beginning of like your transition period, because you'll not only like be presenting yourself as someone who's willing to like take in their work, but also push them. They want to be pushed to new ways, not just stick in their own ways, but also proposing completely new ideas is gonna mess up current workflow more than you would think.
I mean, I think for my position, I'm technically the only architectural designer in my office. There's two other people that have architecture degrees, but they take more on like their art directors. So I'm the one that has to basically be the architect of like all these different projects. And I'm the one that everyone comes to for literally every single question. And I know like you're supposed to be able to admit when you don't know something, but it's also like fake it till you make it, because I'm the only one that they're coming to for any advice about anything.
Google is great.
Yeah, literally like Googling everything. I think also it's like been touched on, but like project management is such a big part of the design field that they do not teach you in school. Most of my day, it really is like emailing vendors and fabricators, and I work with like the client and the architect and all these things. And then I do some work for like a few hours, like later in the day, or like when I really feel motivated after work hours, because I just want to catch up as the only architect. So like interpersonal skills are super important. Like working in group projects are definitely helpful with other architects, but when you start working with people in a bunch of different fields, it really like enlightens you to like how different like everyone operates.
Yeah, and I think building off the whole theme of like asking questions if you don't know, but even if you're just curious, I think curiosity, it's not just, I mean, skill, I know we're not talking about skill sets, but like for example, in my field, like as a designer, you're not really expected to understand how anything's actually built when you're a product like a UI UX designer, because like the coding is done by the engineers, and designers don't really need to get involved in that. But I have found, because in my previous, I've really just worked at early stage startups where I was the only designer on the team, and had to work directly with the engineers. So talking to them, understanding how they were thinking about it, how they built things. I mean, there's parallels, right, with architecture of like understanding the technical side as well. That helped me so much. And now I got off a call with someone from our team right before this, being like, all right, like you're the architect of the team. And I was like, yeah, there's parallels for sure. So yeah, asking questions, if just like figuring out how like things work on the back end, or how they're going to be engineered or built, and like picking up those technical things, even if you don't necessarily need to, I think really helps develop your skills as a designer as well, because then you see that it's not just visual, it's not just like what you've been taught or what you believe, but like there's reasons why certain things are the way that they are. So like while you want to innovate and like change things and like try new things, there's also some things that aren't worth like reinventing the wheel, because they've just been done that way, and there's a reason why they're done that way. So I think, yeah, just understanding asking questions, talking to people from other disciplines on your team and figuring out like how they think about things, why they do things a certain way, I think really helps then, develop, how you work and your workflow and how you work with everyone else.
Wonderful. We're getting to our last question. I've already received a couple student questions, but I want to invite our other students in the room to feel free to drop those questions in the chat, or when the time comes, you could unmute yourselves. So my final question, I know Sabrina, you slightly mentioned on this for a previous answer as well, but how do the challenges and opportunities created by diversity, equity, and or inclusion play out in your current role within the industry that you're in?
I can start. So actually, so a lot of the projects that we work on are, MTA projects or basically projects that are government funded. And right now, especially in the transportation sector, the government is making a big effort to dedicate a certain percentage of basically budget to what are called WMBEs or DBEs, which are women or minority owned businesses, or I think it's called like disadvantaged business enterprise, which are basically businesses that have that are owned and operated by women, minorities, and are registered with the state. So for us, that's created a huge opportunity because of these requirements, basically, like, for example, I think on Penn Station, they needed to have 25% WMBEs. And so we get a lot of, we get asked to join a lot of teams because of that, I work for a woman-owned business. So that's actually, it's a great opportunity. It's also can be challenging because those large government projects aren't really set up for small businesses, which we also are. And so that has its own set of challenges. But I think that, as time moves on, these quotas are going to really start to hopefully like shift the landscape of, what we see in terms of distribution of, people with different backgrounds working on projects. It's obviously, as we mentioned already, still a really male-dominated industry, and certainly in most of the meetings that I'm at, there's just, if there's any women at all, it's just a small handful. But I think also there's an opportunity there to just really, basically just like embrace the discomfort. I think that, it's really important, especially coming out of school, to just remember that you're going to encounter so many situations where you're just not comfortable at all. And just to really, accept that and use it as an opportunity, because that's how you really grow, sort of overcoming, your discomfort in situations where you're very different than everyone else in the room.
I would agree with the idea about opportunities. Because I work on many different projects at the same time. Some of them are receiving public funds from the city or the government, and so they do have those MWBE requirements. And I can tell you, it's really hard to fill those requirements because there's a real need for women and minority-owned businesses. So there's an opportunity, but I personally have found that it's really challenging. And I think that, I'll be frank, architecture is not a really well-paid field, especially when you graduate with student debt. You feel like you need to get a master's because you graduate Barnard with this fantastic education, but it's not a professional degree. And that's in many states, if you want to be a licensed architect, you often will need that. And so I would say there's positives and negatives to that, and that there are these opportunities, but I think it's challenging. And I also will just say, first of all, I'm a white woman. So like in that sense, I have a privilege for sure, but I'm also a mother. And so I have a young child, and the field is not one that has a lot of flexibility, and there's really long hours, sometimes late at night, which is not conducive for having a family. And so I think, again, though, that's an opportunity where I have used my Barnard voice and expressed what I need and what my standards are, and what I feel comfortable doing. And so I would say it's a double-edged sword in that it's hard, but that there is space for improvement, and that I think that, I feel like I need to try and help make those improvements for myself and for others.
I think especially recently, there's been just a lot more discourse about the inequalities of the architecture field, especially, the unionizing that's been going on, and the drama that's been going. I don't know if anyone follows architecture meme pages, but with like Soil posting their ridiculous job posting, 8 years of experience for 65K. They thought that was like okay to post on the internet, and people blasted them for it. But that's like the field that this is, and like I think, to what Kate was saying, the field is difficult for women, especially in terms of like our professional progress and like family planning, and like basically like the older you get, when you actually start thinking about family, that's also the time you should start getting licensed. And it's just very difficult to navigate. But I think especially in the field, like it's really good to have like a cohort of other female designers to get advice from. I've been like super lucky with my internships, and that like a lot of my teams have been mostly women with children, and I'll just like ask them these questions, and they'll like give me a lot of support that obviously you wouldn't get from your male cohort that their wives are taking care of their children essentially. So I think this is a time when like these conversations are happening, which is like great, but it's very slow. And to the last question about like skills you should have, like advocating for yourself, like never work at a firm that underpays you and overworks you, and that you feel like it's like, why am I spending so much time working here when I'm getting paid like 60K? It's just not worth it. And you should find a space, even if like the field itself is just underpaying, that you actually feel like your voice matters and that the work is interesting and you're actually enjoying what you're doing, because you have spent so much time leading up to this point, graduating with your degree and everything.
I'd say also, a lot of times, I mean, obviously I'm a minority woman. um, you end up, at least from my perspective, you end up feeling like you have to speak up for certain things, which can put a lot of pressure on you. But it's also like, you shouldn't feel like it's your responsibility to fix the industry. Like, I'm just one person. So you really should, like, I would say that's a challenge of, at least for a minority like myself, where you feel like you have to have a certain voice, or people look to you and think that you speak for all diverse people. And like, I won't say, but like I've gotten questions of like, what is that okay to say? I'm like, I don't, that's not my minority. I can't speak for that. Like, I've been asked, like, is that okay to say? Is this okay to say? What are you comfortable with? I'm like, even if I say my life experience, that doesn't explain anybody else's. Everyone has a different life experience. Everyone has a different background. And so I would say that's one of the things that comes up during these conversations, where you kind of get the whole conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, and you kind of get the whole like, oh, there's the am I the diverse hire? Is this what I'm here for? So I would guess that would be one of the like, it does happen, unfortunately, where you might start to question whether you're there because you're the diverse hire, because of the way you look, or that's why you're here, because you being included on the roster or the staff list helps them to say like, we have this much diversity in our firm. And I would say, like, don't let that get to you. And it's kind of like you have to work at not building a wall, but just strengthening yourself to not let that be your determining factor of why you're there. Don't don't think about it. Don't think about that way. Make sure that people understand that you're there for your skills, for what you bring to the table. And you make sure you speak to your voice. Don't, I mean, if you're an advocate, an activist, or if that's the thing that you want to speak for, go for it. If you want to make that your role. But if that's not the only thing you want to be spoken to or for, then make sure that people understand that that's not the only thing you're here for. If you want to be at the table, at the design table, explain like this wall should go there, let's say, for example, something simple. It shouldn't be like, oh, this wall, as a minority, this wall goes there because, you know, somebody who is minority would be offended if the wall was over here. Like, don't feel the need to defend yourself that way. Just speak as if you're a regular person, because we are people. That's what it is. We're not dick. Yes, your experience, like my experience, my background will give me a certain point of view, and you're definitely bring it up if you see that something in your work or design or just like in general is coming up and you feel like your perspective would benefit. But also in this day and time, like don't feel like there's like this weird obsession of like just because I'm the way I look, I have to speak for this. And it's a fine line of what you're comfortable with and what you want to speak to. Because again, I explained to folks, I'm like, I am not a diversity like DEIA consultant. I'm not the expert. There are people who their career is to speak to that and they're trained for that. There's reasons for that. Like you explaining yourself and explaining like, you know, there's a reason why PR exists. There's a reason why these consultants exist. Don't feel like it's on you to determine the firm's DEIA. Like I would say definitely don't let anyone get away with that, to use you in that way.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm looking at time right now. We have about 15 minutes on the clock, and so I do want to get to our student questions. So I'm actually going to put these two questions together, one from student Grace Schleck and another from Ellie George, as you guys see in the open chat here. So Grace is asking, do you have any recommendations for finding internships, especially if our portfolios are not as robust as architecture-centered programs? And then I would also like to add into that Ellie's question. Do you have any advice for first-time job applicants graduating from the architecture department who have these softer design and communication skills, especially because Barnard students are graduating with a BA? Throw that to our panelists.
I have a lot of thoughts about this because I had a lot of trouble finding a job when I graduated. Maybe in part that was also because when I graduated from Barnard, it was during the recession. And so there were really few architecture jobs. And like I said before, I didn't know what a wall was. So like, why would someone hire me? And what I found was that for me, I found jobs in kind of like adjacent fields. So I worked in like construction project management, which helped me get some like technical knowledge and skills under my belt. But I will say I didn't love it, but like I learned a lot, and that was really important for me at that point in my life. And I think when I looked around at the other people who had found jobs, even though they had the same degree as me and we had studio together, they were really good at reaching out to people in and out of their Barnard network and otherwise. And like, I'm just going to say Manuela did exactly this. She and I met like maybe 4 or 5 years ago because she found me either, I don't know if it was through Beyond Barnard, but she was really good at leveraging the people that she knew to help her get her resume through the stack, basically. And this isn't unique to architecture, but I think that this is really important if you feel like you don't have the skills that are being asked for, which I feel like every time I looked at like an entry-level architecture position, they were like 1 to 3 years of experience in an office. And I was like, how is that entry level if I just graduated? Like, isn't that the whole point? And that was really frustrating. And so I think that that would be my biggest, those are my 2 pieces of advice: to reach out to people and to be open to adjacent sectors that will still get you some of the knowledge and like the technical stuff and that you can put on your resume.
Just speaking to that, I did reach out to Kate and a bunch of other alums and other people in the industry like as she said, to because you end up with the wall of like, and it's the same thing everywhere, but you end up with the wall of like they don't know you. They don't know who you are. They see your resume, they see where your background, and they judge you based on what's on the piece of paper. And to get past that point is to ask people, to get to know people, and to just have conversations. A lot of the conversations I had didn't always lead to, opportunities. I ended up with, great friends, great connections, and lovely Kates, of course. And, you end up learning more while you're doing this networking process of like what's really in the industry, where the interest lying, what kind of skills they're looking for. And it really, the whole process of just networking really helped my interview skills because I learned as I was going through it what I should speak to and what wasn't good to speak to, or just what wasn't helping me out. And even the cover letters, it was just, you need to present yourself in a way where you're telling yourself like a story, not necessarily just what you can do, but how what you can do will help and what it helped you learn. Like it's really important to express not just like, oh, I know how to use Rhino, or oh, I know how to use Maya. You need to explain like, well, I used Rhino to then make this model of this fence that was barricading this neighborhood, but then I created the fence to have, such and such gaps in it to create like interactions between this neighbor and this neighbor. Just something simple like that is like it keys them into what your thought process is, what you think about how you think. And it really goes back into communication and the presentation skills that we learn. It's really just presenting yourself in a proper way. And it's hard also. I know it's hard when you don't always get to the interview process. So it's also about like what you specifically say in your resume, what you specifically say in your cover letter. A lot of the times, I mean, in my experience, they ask for cover letters. Don't treat the cover letter as just like, putting regurgitating out what's in your resume. Really just hone in on like one or two things, that an experience that you had, something you learned, and just try to make it unique. Just play around with it. You can be playful with the cover letter. It doesn't have to be like, dear sir, I know how to do this, I did this. Like, you can play around with it. There's a lot of like, it's going to catch someone's attention if you're being a little bit different about it. Obviously, be careful of the ones that just have like the form based ones, but in general, just be more creative about how you present yourself. Don't feel like you have to stick to what everyone has been doing. Really speak to how you are as a person, because that's gonna make you stand out on top of like what you getting to know people. But if you haven't gotten that far, just focus first on like how you're showing your work, how you're showing yourself, and how that ties in together. And I will say also one more thing of like the portfolio. I did have the issue of like I didn't have any internships when I was at Barnard, while I was at Barnard, and I was applying purely based on my work from Barnard. And I went back and I taught myself skills that I did not learn at Barnard to then improve my portfolio and how I was presenting it. And I used the conversations I was having with people to ask them like, what do you think of my portfolio? Because then they're going to give you feedback of people who are already in the industry and tell you like, maybe this isn't really working, or this is working, maybe you should work on this. And bit by bit you start working on, just not even from Barnard point, but even like between Barnard and your next job, you get to work, you're working on skills that you can also speak to when you finally get to the interview process. Not just like you were like, if there's a gap on your resume, then you're just like, well, I was working on A, B, and C. You're not saying like, oh, I was sitting on my couch applying to resumes, trying to find jobs. So
I think this is a really tough position to be in because I feel like for junior designers, in my experience, they are looking for technical skills because junior designers are doing the bottom of the barrel in terms of tasks on a list at a firm. So in terms of like practicality, the fact that you do have to get your master's degree to even be like able to get licensed, that's like, I saw that as my gateway into like getting the skills I need to be just like an architect that I was missing with my undergrad degree, and something that I needed to even become licensed. But I think I took 2 years between undergrad and grad school, and I worked as an office manager, design assistant at a notable firm. And when I was there, like everyone in the office were architects, and I started networking the hell out of it. And I was able to get all these connections, and my boss, who she's a very notable female architect. She like wrote my recommendation letter for grad school. And when I was looking for internships, I hit her up. I hit my old coworkers up. You don't have to be a designer at an architecture firm. There are tons of other roles that you can take on that put you in that environment to be surrounded by people that can help you further down the line. And while you're doing that, you could also take the initiative to like sharpen up your skills if you want to, but you could learn it in grad school. Or, if you're in, like, because I was a design assistant, even if my role was mostly to run the office, I would be asked to do stuff all the time. I was doing RFPs, I was doing RFQs, I was finishing diagrams, I was helping with submittals. Like, you pick up little skills just being in that kind of environment. So I wouldn't be discouraged if just applying for a traditional junior designer role isn't working out, because there's just so many things. Like there's someone who I knew who worked at Snowhetta that basically was there just to like work on their competition entries, and she was at Snowhetta and was like making connections there. So I wouldn't take it too hard. Like, you're fresh out of college. There's so many people applying for these positions that there's like high competition, but there's a lot of other jobs you can do too that just kind of get you your foot in the door to a longer architectural career.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, just even for internships, like lean into the skill that you feel you're strongest in. So you can do other jobs at architecture firms, like Cole was saying. Like, if you're good at writing, you can be an office manager, you can help write RFPs, RFQs, all that stuff. If you feel like your graphic design skills are really strong, like lean into that in your applications and in your cover letter when you're either for a job or an internship. And then you can be, designing what is presented for competitions and helping on that. And then it's like I think the biggest things that I think every Barnard student can do is like learn on the job. So like, even if your position is something else, like no doubt you're going to be picking up other skills. People are always going to ask you to do other things. So it's possible to just, if it's a matter, I know in like architecture, probably where you work helps get your next job. So just getting your foot in the door is pretty important. So even if your position isn't exactly right, like as long as you have the skills and can speak to it and are learning new skills, it's still like a good way to go.
I think we have room for one more question, and I think we'll move into the subject of grad school, because we did get a question on it. I'm seeing what Kate's added to our chat here as well, that you don't have to have a master's degree to go down this path. And the question that we got is a second one from Grace, and it's quite specific. So, what are some grad schools you would recommend to look at the intersections of public health and architecture? And I just want to add to this question, for those who did choose to go to grad school, for those who didn't choose to go to grad school, can you speak on your decision-making process with that as well?
So I just graduated in January. I went to Rice University, and to be frank, I was trying to find the best education for the book. Like, I was like, I am not going into heavy debt. And Rice University is a top architecture school, and the tuition is already starting half the tuition it would be at an Ivy League school. So, and then they give a lot of money. But in terms of the other question about the public health, the intersection with public health and everything, at Rice, there was a heavy emphasis on interacting with the Houston community as a whole. There's a whole class dedicated to building affordable housing for a community. Like, you literally go there and build houses for people in the community. And there's just like a lot more interaction with the city as a whole and the school by itself. The school is extremely small. So it was it was kind of like Barnard's program. It was just like very personal. Like, there's not that many students. Like, I think the architecture school with faculty and the undergrad is 250 people. We all stand in a room to take a picture together. Like, it's very, very small. So I think for grad schools, it's super important to go visit it, see if you relate to their pedagogy. And if you see yourself at the school with your peers and the type of work that they're doing. And also, yes, I think it's very important to think about the financial aspect of it, because grad school is expensive, and it's going to take you some time to pay it off if you don't play it out wisely afterwards.
Yeah, I agree completely with Cole. And when I went to grad school, I actually did it because I was making this sort of a career shift. And so for me, it was really a key step to move, basically just to shift into the architecture field, coming from really not a design background at all. It's an interesting question about the public health program, because I thought about that a lot when I applied to grad school. And I mean, so I applied now, it was, I started in 2012. So it's been now already 10 years, which is kind of hard to believe. And at that time, you know, the schools that I was looking at, they're really the education, the way that they, you know, build the master's degree programs at the accredited schools, it's all dictated by NCARB, which is the, you know, the National Architecture or something or another, basically that accredits the programs that enables you to take the licensing exams. So I didn't find any school that really had like a public health focus, let's say, but there were certainly schools that were more, you know, theoretical, schools that were more practical, schools like, sounds similar to Rice University, like Auburn State University has the Rural Studio, which is a very social impact forward program where they have they're building structures for the community. I felt also, I ended up going to Parsons, and I also felt that they had that sort of inclination as well. There was a program that they used, I don't know if they still run it, but it was the design studio where you worked with the Parks Department of New York City to actually build different structures for the Parks Department. It was like a summer, it was a year-long studio and then a summer build. So I think that, you know, in the research that you do, you know, maybe if you can't find anything specific to public health, you know, you might want to just look for programs that have more practical applications, sort of socially conscious applications, because I certainly found a lot of programs that were just like very, very theoretical. And for me, that just wasn't really something that I was interested in. I also ended up going to Parsons as well because it was small. There was only 25 people in our class, and that's comparatively small compared to some of the other programs where you'll have upwards of like, you know, 50 or 100 people in a class. And that was really important to me as well, because as someone who came from, you know, not a design background, I mean, the learning curve was like intense, and to have the support from from my classmates, from the professors, you know, I just think that I would have been totally lost in a program that was hundreds of students where you're sort of like, you know, on your own to kind of find your way.
For me, sorry.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, please.
Oh, it's 2 o'clock.
Oh, no, we have time. We'll stay one more minute for your response. Go ahead.
I was just going to say very quickly that for me, the decision to grad school was kind of a triangulation of what I mentioned before about having trouble finding a job in New York City, knowing that I wanted to be a licensed architect, and also knowing that I was very interested in working with historic buildings, and that I wanted to be an architect that kind of worked with new buildings and additions to historic buildings. And so I was pretty specific in what I was looking for, and that helped me to narrow down the schools that I applied to. But as other people have said, I mean, there's a lot of elements there, and especially the financial aspect of it is important. And I would say that if you are not sure you want to be a licensed architect, grad school might not be important or necessary for you. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of years where you are spending money and not earning money. And so I think that that's something to think about. And I would really encourage people to reach out to people on this panel, people in the network, you know, your professors, and to talk about it and if that's the right choice for you.
I absolutely love this emphasis on networking throughout this panel. Both Kate and Manuela, you guys have been mentioning it over and over again, Cole as well as, Sabrina and Savan as well. Thank you again to our panelists for joining us today and just providing such thoughtful insight. This was such a fruitful panel. You will be hearing from me. A reminder to our students that you will be getting a recording of this event, and we hope to see you at our next Career Insights. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.